Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Docker Best Practices track. My name is Christy Howard. I'm a software engineer here at Docker, and I'll be your host for today. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch and have been enjoying the session so far. Up next, I'm really excited to introduce my colleague, Lee Namba, who is a solution architect at Docker, where he helps out a lot of our strategic customers with technical expertise. So today's session is called Modernizing Traditional Apps from PoC to Production. And please give a very warm round of applause to Lee.
Thanks, Christy. Are you guys all having a good DockerCon, hopefully? All right, I got this session after lunch, so if you guys fall asleep, I'll understand. I won't take it personally. Okay, so I'm Lee Namba. I'm a solution architect at Docker. And what I'll be talking about today is taking, once you've done a POC, taking that application, that first one, and getting it into production. Okay, I'd like to start with this. You guys might know what this is. This is the hype curve from Gartner. It usually starts with a technology trigger, so new technology comes out. Then everybody gets very excited about it. Then you try and deploy it within your enterprise. You run into problems. Then you slowly work out the kinks, and then you eventually get to productivity, and you see that return on your investment that you got so excited about in the beginning. So how many people here have used Docker or have done a POC? You guys at that stage? That's great. That's quite a lot of you. So hopefully you feel like this guy. You're like, wow, this is awesome. And you should be about here, hopefully, if your POC went well, right? So you're thinking, yay, everything went well. It was quite fast, quite easy. I see the power, I see the value in Docker. And now, so you think, okay, let's get this thing into production, right? What do I have to do? So you go, all right, I'll add a little bit of RAM to my VM. I'll add some more vCPUs, do swarm, deploy it to a couple of VMs. Hand it over to the ops guys, right, your servers, and then ask them to open up a port, a hole in the firewall. We should be in production, right? You're thinking, no problem. So you tell your boss, hey, I think I can get this thing up in production, in a week. And she goes, whoa, that's pretty impressive. Okay, cool. So you start along your journey, and you go, all right, I'll go talk to the network guys. Hey, can I open up port 8080 on our corporate firewall? Network guys goes, there's no way we're going to open up any port unless you get authorization from the security team. So you go to the security team. You go, hey, I got my new Docker application. Can you guys, clear this so I can open up, port 8080 with the network guys? Security team goes, all right, that's that Docker stuff. We heard about that. People are starting to use it. We need to first do a full security audit on it. It'll only take about 3 to 4 weeks. And you go, oh boy. So you're starting to do this, right? 3 to 4 weeks, I promised my boss next week. What am I going to do? Well, let's forget about that for now. Let's go talk to the ops guys. Maybe they'll have a solution. They can do some sort of routing, workaround or something. So you talk to the ops guys and say, hey, can you guys take over these servers? They're running this new cool Docker application. The ops guys goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. Did we install those servers? Where did they come from? It's like, we don't touch anything that we didn't install. And even if we were to take them over, where's the run book? We need 200-page run book. We need to know how all of these detailed operations are going to work. And then right then the application team comes and they say, hey, you know that app that you Dockerized for us? We have a new version, but we changed the caching mechanism. So we're going to need to do some more performance testing on it. Can you deploy it to our staging platform? And we'll do some more performance testing. It'll only take about 2 to 3 weeks, but we really need to make sure this new caching mechanism works. And you think, oh God, 2 to 3 weeks. Plus security audit, 4 weeks. This whole 1 week into production, I don't know if that's going to happen right now. Right then your boss comes in and says, all right, we bought the Google ads. We told all of our most strategic customers that the site will go live next Tuesday. So, we ready? And at that point, you're here. Now, the only thing left to do is to start crawling your way back out. So you tell your boss, I think it's going to take a little bit longer. Now, I've been in a couple of these holes. So let me back up a little bit, tell you about my experience, a couple of my experiences. Before I worked at Docker, I worked at a large systems integrator, and we Dockerized a customer-facing portal. It's for one of the largest energy companies in the world. 16 million users, 75 VMs. Customers would go to this site, they could get their electricity bills, they could see their electricity consumption. So this was a very high visibility, very strategic project. This is the very first one they ever Dockerized in the whole company. So it was deployed over 10 environments, so from development, integration, testing, load testing, staging, pre-prod, prod. And then they even had to keep several older versions. The actual application stack itself was quite complicated. There was an Apache, there was JBosses, there was database, Postgres, primary, secondary. There was even a content management system, Adobe Experience Manager. There was an authoring stack, a publishing stack. It was quite a complicated application. And what made it even more difficult was we had to do this in flight. What that means is while we were doing the transformation, new versions of the application kept coming. So that's why we had over 11 environments, because we would deploy to one environment while one team was testing it, and then another version would come and we'd deploy that to another environment. And they had several testing teams all testing the different versions of the application simultaneously. So that's one nice example. Another one, more recent one, while I was at Docker, is for Société Générale. And they're one of our largest customers. They're actually giving a talk right after this. So if you guys get a chance, please go see their talk. It's a really good one. We helped them Dockerize their financing platform. And this is a solution to help finance very, very large construction products like stadiums, bridges, hospitals, schools. This one, they had already transformed 2 microservices, but there wasn't just a few of them, there was over 30 of them. And what made this project a little more interesting was we had to do a parallel run. What that means is they didn't do a clean cutover to the new version. What they did was they flighted a certain percentage of the traffic to the new Docker platform. And what made that interesting is we had to maintain basically 2 branches, not necessarily of source code, but of the different configuration. So doing that took a little bit of ingenuity, but we had a really good team working on it, and it's been in production, and it's very successful. So I've had some real-world experiences taking real projects into production. So based on these experiences, what if I told you that there's a way to avoid these holes and and not have to be able to crawl out of this hole? I've done this before. I still have some scars on my knees to show for it. So we think there's a better way. Then you can build a bridge across this trough of disillusionment. And it's called, you guessed it, right? Modernized Traditional Application Program. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is zoom in a little bit on this. What would this foundation look like if we were to build this bridge? So the first foundation is governance. I know we all talk about this. We say it's not about the technology, it's about the process, the organization. That's the hardest part. But it really is true. When I've gone into enterprises, try to deploy this, I've witnessed fights. We're there, we're trying to coach them, and the dev guys, they're fighting with the ops guys. It's not about technology, it's about who owns what, who's responsible for what. If you don't put in place good organization, good responsibility, a good operating model, the whole program could fall apart pretty quickly. The second foundation is a platform. So this is the actual technology itself, putting in the technology, deploying it to several clusters, making sure it's highly available. You have disaster recovery, you have all your operating model on the platform set. And then finally, the third pillar is the pipeline. So this could be a tool chain that's very simple. It could be scripts, or it could go all the way to some very sophisticated CI/CD pipelines. Now, once you have these in place, then hopefully you can get your applications into production pretty easily. Excuse me. Now what I want to do is now with these foundations, how do we turn this into a process, right? So I want to take you through that really quickly. So you said you guys have done your POCs. The first thing we'll do is we'll do a quick assessment. And that's finding, do we take the app that you did your POC with, or do we choose another one to get that first app into production? Maybe once you've done the POC, you said, okay, this was good, but we want something a little more representative, or we want to try new technology. So we need to get all the people on board to figure out which app are we going to try and get into production, and make sure everybody is aligned, and we have all of the proper owners aligned. We do a kickoff, and then we're going to start 4 activity streams. So here we see our different pillars, the foundations. So on the bottom, there's governance. We're going to start that. We need to talk about, as I said before, all of the different organization, operation model, who's going to do support, who's going to do training. Start the platform stream, getting all of your clusters deployed. We start the pipeline stream, so it could be you don't have any CI/CD in place, that's okay. Or you already do have CI/CD in place, then let's start to integrate that into the Docker platform. And then finally, the application stream. So that's your first app that you want to put into production. All of these streams have dependencies, interdependencies. They all move along in parallel until you go live with your first application. Once you've gone live with that first application, hopefully it was successful. Yay. And the bottom pillars, or the bottom processes, they form an MTA factory. So you don't have to do these again. You just do this once, and once that's done, then you can start bringing in more applications and run them through the factory and containerize, and they'll get better and better. As we saw in the keynote this morning, you can even then get everything you learn when you're Dockerizing new applications and put that right back into the factory. And then even once you've gone live already with a couple applications, what you can then do is you start to optimize. So that's where you think about, do I go to microservices? Do I break up my big monolithic legacy application and deploy it in a different way? Okay, so that's the process. So I'm going to now go through each of these different activity streams in a little bit more detail now. Okay? So governance. What do we mean by governance? This is a pretty standard deployment in a large enterprise. You have development people on one side, you have ops people on the other side. In the middle, you have maybe some CI/CD people or already a bunch of tooling in place. You have developer machines, you have non-production environments, and then you actually have production environments. The production environments, they may be going across several data centers or even up into the cloud. Between those different clusters, you might have different Docker trusted registries that you're doing image promotion into. So Docker is going to be touching a whole bunch of your organization. And if you don't make sure that they're all aligned and they all play together and everybody knows their responsibility, then you can run into problems. Some considerations for governance as well, and some best practices are do your assessment, figure out which apps are the right ones to take to production. With organization, you don't have to change it. Just keep your existing organization. But make sure that everybody is aligned and they know what their roles are. Docker will change some things, especially in how you deliver applications, but everybody can keep their same roles and responsibilities. You need to obviously plan out how long it's going to take into production and when we think everything will get done. One very key thing is, I'm going to harp on this on all of these different streams, is figure out your operating model early. Don't try to, or at least don't figure it out, but at least start discussing it with all of the people. So what do I mean by operating model? It's what are the service level agreements? Who owns what? Who's going to be in charge of supporting this? Who do we need to do if there's going to be updates on the platform? Who's going to send out those kinds of informations and notifications to people? These are all things that you should really think about before you really start down this journey. Support levels. There'll be level 1, level 2, level 3, etc., and then it even goes out beyond to your other software vendor providers. Who's going to be, taking the tickets? Who will train up the teams? One tip is don't do one global training and then think at one time and then start doing your onboarding or your rollout. The teams will forget their training, and then once they start Dockerizing, then they'll create lots of errors, and your internal level 1 support will have to handle all those errors. Just try and phase in your training right before teams start Dockerizing their applications. And then also marketing. You might think, I'll put up this cool platform and everybody will just flock to it. It's not necessarily the case. A lot of projects, they're busy. They have deadlines. They don't have time to figure out or necessarily even a budget of when they want to Dockerize their application. They need to know, they need to be informed, and you need to tell them it's available, it's easy, we have onboarding resources, you can come on board. A specific example of if you don't put in place an operating model, what can happen is with images. This happens all the time. This is a pretty typical image hierarchy. So on one side you have all of your base images. Those might be handled by your ops people, and then on the other side they derive off, the applications teams, they derive off of these base images. So imagine there's a vulnerability found in one of the base images. Could be at the OS level, it could be at the language level. And so let's say the ops team, they say, okay, there's a vulnerability, we need to update the base images, they update them. But then what's your policy for all of your application teams to upgrade to those new base images? Is it mandatory? Do you send out a friendly reminder? Do you give them a certain date by the time they have to update? Otherwise that vulnerability goes into their application. These are all questions that you don't want to figure out while you're actually in production. You want to try and discuss these and agree upon something before you're actually in production. Okay, the next stream is the actual platform itself. I love that picture. So this is talking about when you're actually going to put in place a platform, on the top, there are all these integration points. So you have to figure out which operating system you're going to use, how will it integrate into your CI/CD system, if you have one or not. Image, what type of storage you're going to use, object storage or not. Will you use networking plugins? What type of volumes you're going to use, what type of storage, NFS, CIFS, what are your existing applications using today? There's config management, there's monitoring, there's logging, there's SSO, do you do secrets management? There's all sorts of different integration points that you need to think about and plan for when you're doing this deployment of the actual platform. One of the good things about Docker is we don't force you to just take our entire platform and then you have to change your ways and your existing infrastructure to our platform. We actually integrate into your platform. So you can leave all of your existing systems in place, like monitoring or logging, and we'll seamlessly integrate into it. And actually, the Societe Generale's talk is all about that. So if you're interested in more details on that, you can go see their talk. Once you have a platform in place, you're probably not going to build, or one cluster in place, it's not going to be just one. There's a whole workflow. So how does that work? Usually you start with building your applications. We recommend creating a separate build cluster. This can be done through RBAC or role-based access control, where you dedicate certain nodes just for building images. And that's where a CI system can be used to build not only compile the applications, but also build the actual images themselves. Once that build stage is done, then you deploy it to a bunch of non-production environments. So once again, integration, functional testing, UAT, there can be multiple versions. Like in that one example I told you, we had 11 of these. All the way up to staging. All along the way, you can sign your images, you can figure out all of your promotion policies. And finally, you push out to production. And once again, this could be across one data center, it could be across a hybrid cloud. This is just the general workflow that we've seen within our enterprise customers. Other considerations for the platform. So once again, do your requirements and planning. Figure out the operating model. What does that mean? There's a new version, let's say, of Docker that's being deployed or that came out. How do I update my cluster or my clusters? Do I do it as a blue-green? Do I upgrade it in place? Do I have all my backup procedures and my restore procedures there? These are all questions that come up on a daily basis, and they need to be resolved before you go into production. I already talked about integration with existing systems. And then, as any good system, you need to figure out high availability, deploy it as clusters, and then, more importantly, disaster recovery. So do I do disaster recovery across several data centers? What happens if one data center goes down? Do I cut over everything to the other data center? Or do I do a stretched cluster between the two data centers? That's another possibility, depending on the latency between data centers. These are all, before you actually go into production, things to take in consideration. What is your service level agreement going to be on the actual platform when you start onboarding your internal customers? And then finally, test the platform before you onboard these new applications. So create a small little test application, run it through all of your platforms, and test out all of these different, your operating model. An example of, in our process, how we do this to phase in all of these different platforms or clusters is, okay, so we've done the assessment. We started our governance stream. First thing to do is build a dev cluster. This gets your operations people hands-on practice with actually using the platform, figuring out how to start it, stop it, if you lose quorum, how to get quorum back, servers go down. Once that's done, you can say, okay, hey, CI people, can you start deploying your different tools onto this dev platform, start testing it out, start seeing if we can integrate into this development platform to do automated builds, compiles, etc. And then on the very top, you can tell your first application team, all right, Dockerize everything locally on your workstation. And then once the CI/CD people have finished, let's try run that through on the development platform. None of this has to necessarily be HA or disaster recovery, but let's just get something up and running pretty quick. Then after that, once again, we're sequencing here. The platform team, they can start building then the true pre-prod or prod cluster. They can figure out all of the high availability, disaster recovery, put it across multiple data centers. CI/CD team, pipeline team, they can extend then their tools onto the next cluster and start actually doing real deployments to all of this extended production platform. And then the app team then just uses the CI/CD and says, okay, now let's deploy that to pre-prod. And we can start maybe doing load testing and doing some final UAT testing until you go live. So this is how we can sequence things and get you to going live actually a little bit faster. Okay, the next activity stream is the pipeline, or CI/CD pipeline. So once again, this is the general workflow of a pretty generic pipeline. So let's go a little bit more in depth on an example recommended just for the integration part. So on one side here, start on the left, you have your version control. Whatever continuous integration software you want to use, there's usually some type of agent. So it'll detect, a push, or there's some type of trigger, or it may be every day. And it'll do, in this case, let's say we're using Git, and we're using a Java application. So it'll do a Maven deploy, it'll compile the application, it'll package it up, and it can push that into a repository manager. So your binary is in there. Next step is on the job, or it could be another agent, is it pulls out the configuration files or the Docker files, and it does a build of the actual image. Once that's done, it can push it into the Docker trusted registry. Now you can do step 1 and step 2 in the same actual Docker file if you're using the multi-stage builds. Some companies choose to separate the two just because the binaries that they use, some of them are used in other applications. So they like to cut those 2 steps in half. Once you pushed your built image into the Docker Trusted Registry, the third step then is to actually deploy it onto a test environment. So you deploy that, once again, another step within your job. And then the last step is you can then deploy your hopefully automated testing in another, you can decide to containerize it or not on that actual test environment. So this is a pretty typical continuous integration workflow. Now the bonus points here, if you really want to push this, is to actually containerize your actual CI agents. And I've seen that done in some companies. It's actually it makes things a lot more interesting. It allows you to distribute your CI/CD systems a lot better. Just because when you have CI/CD, let's say you have some masters, in place, those tend to scale poorly when you have a lot of applications. And containers just allow you to scale that. So you can even create a master per application team. And then those masters then can spawn off workers for each application team. And those workers can be, if they're run in a container, they can be ephemeral. So they live for the time of doing their build or their compilation, and then they're destroyed. And so it makes things much more distributable. So CI/CD considerations. So once again, you need to plan this out. I'll harp again on the operating model. So just figure out who's in charge of the CI/CD, who's in charge of all of these masters if you decide to distribute it, who's in charge of the images if you decide to containerize it. You integrate it with your existing systems, so your version control, your repository managers, your DTRs, and your Docker EE UCP clusters. Once again, if this is going to go across in your enterprise, if you have hundreds of applications, or maybe even thousands in some companies, you got to think about the scale of this, right? And then once again, test it before you start onboarding your applications. So create a small little test, that same test application, try and run it through the whole CI/CD pipeline before you tell your teams to come on board. All right, the next stream is the application stream. I'll go through this quickly. One thing is application selection. One of the first things you'll do is to figure out which application you want to Dockerize. So the easiest ones are on the top. They're the stateless ones. We all know about that. The next ones are a little bit harder. They're the stateful ones. So these could be your databases. Some types of distributed caches are that way. And the hardest ones are where you have a complex installation. This means that you can't actually put it into a Docker file. It might be a click installation, or you have to call out to an external server. What I recommend in this case is to just fire up a container, run your installation, clicking, going out to different servers. Once you're all done, then save that as an image. You won't be able to reproduce that, but at least it will save you a lot of trouble. I actually had to do this, and after a couple months of work, that's how we decided to resolve that problem. Once you figure out which application to Dockerize, you need to figure out what type of images you're going to build. A lot of people, the first thing they ask me is, what do I put in an image? So there's different image types. There's your base images. So in that, you just put in your operating system and maybe a middleware, so an application server. Everything else stays outside. So you mount a volume, put in your configuration, and it's very flexible. On the other side of that is what I call an environment image. This is where you bake everything into the image. Configuration, your application, everything. This is good because it's very portable and traceable because everything's in it. So I can deploy it on my laptop, push it up to the cloud. And then the final one is a compromise in the middle. And this is what I call a release image. And this is where you actually put the release of your application in the image, but you keep your configuration on the outside and you inject it in. And that way it is agnostic to the environment. So you can deploy the same image to, your 11 different environments. Other application considerations. So we go in, we do an assessment, we look at your stack, figure out which things should be containerized or not. Once again, the application operating model, how will it be deployed? Blue, green, canary. Train up the teams, operationalize. So the security people, they're going to look, first thing they're going to do is there a root user in your image or in your container? They're not going to like that. So you got to take out all of your root users, all your local hosts, get all of those out. And then do you actually automate and test? If they're already automated, do you containerize those or not? All right, I'd like to give you this is a true story of a migration that we did. So we had a customer, and they said, we're on our cloud provider. We need to move to the new cloud provider in 4 months because our contract's running out. So they said, this Docker thing is new, but we're going to put you up with a VM migration team, and we're going to do a race. So we both started at the same time, 2 teams, and it became quite apparent really quickly that we were able to containerize things a lot faster than the VM people were able to rip out all of our old scripts on the old cloud and create all of the new scripts on the new cloud. So after a couple months, they canceled the VM team and they said, hey, go join the Docker team. And we did that, and so now they're on their new cloud, and they gain with containers 85% of their deployment time. And so this, this was a pretty cool lessons to be learned on this is, first thing to do is always Dockerize your applications and then think about refactoring or then think about redeploying them to the cloud, but always containerize them first. All right, finally I'd like to end with just the process. So we talked about this MTA process and the 4 different streams. We also break those streams down into smaller components and even smaller components. So this process is something we run through with our partners, and our partners run through with our customers. You can see the 4 different streams. And in each of these little boxes, we have toolkit. We have guides, reference architectures, tools, runbooks, templates, checklists, all sorts of different things to help you figure out each one of these boxes based on our experience. And hopefully with that, you guys will build your bridge or avoid the hole. Then you'll start batching your applications, and it'll go even faster and faster. Thank you, guys. If you're interested in more MTA stuff, it's up there. And I'll take any questions now.